face this so I can see the screen a little better here. Are we ready, Chris? Okay. If you wanted to know what was going on at Epiphany, you could always look at the paint board that was kept on a three-legged tripod just outside the narthex. We got to 1993 last Sunday, and so far we have been covering Epiphany's history almost year by year. And while we shall continue to do that to an extent, today we shall first be covering a few different topics. We shall start with a few more pictures of the 1993 in construction, and then go to the Rally Day picnics, followed by an area we have neglected the last couple of weeks, and that is the actual church services. And then we shall have a short segment on our Caroline Furnace trips, and finally end by talking about the church in the late 90s and early 2000s. We start with a picture of the groundbreaking in 1992 and follow with a picture of the narthex being built. But then we go to the side where we see that the alcove into the narthex has been torn off, and also the passage to the Sunday school wing opened up so that Price Hall could be constructed. Then we have a picture of the church upon completion, followed by one of the inside with the balcony but no stairs. And one last view that is a photo of the new construction at night. We also have an unusual view from pretty far away of the entire structure. Unfortunately, there are trees intervening, so we can't see it completely. With the added construction, the county demanded that we construct a retaining pond in front lawn, which became known as Price's Pond. Now here first is a picture of what the lawn looked like before the pond was built. And if you will, take notice especially of that light in the front lawn that illuminated the cross. We're going to come back to it in just a moment. And here is a picture of the actual pond when it was first built. And one last picture, a humorous reference to the fact it was known as Price's Pond, that was actually produced at Chris Price's last, presented when Chris was, I can't think of the word.
Retiring.
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 Thank you. Here. Now that we go on to the Rally Day picnics. Here's a picture where the church committees and various groups had tables set up so that members could learn what they do and perhaps offer their help to the committee if so inclined. Now here's the same scene in color with members looking at the various displays on the tables. The next 7 pictures show some of the individual tables. Lutheran Church women table. I don't know what this table was. These pictures are followed by 5 that are general views of the picnic, including people eating. Then we have 3 pictures of the children using a multicolored cloth to play with. We end with 4 pictures showing the adults playing. Followed by 1 final picture. The next topic is our actual services, with the first few pictures being during the Sala pastorate, and then we'll follow up with pictures during Chris Price's pastorate. Here we show people entering the narthex, followed by 2 photos of the choir processing down the middle aisle. I don't know if the next photo is of the choir or the confirmands in the chancel, but I think it's the confirmands. Then we have Pastor Sala up by the altar, followed by a picture of a baptism. And then 1 choir picture. We start with Chris Price's pictures with the acolyte lighting the candles, followed by Chris and the choir processing down the middle aisle. Then Chris preaching. And since Chris was a sole minister at first, he had to do the children's sermons as well. And of course, the baptisms. I've got a second picture of the baptisms. Next, we have 3 pictures of communion. Communing the choir and communing we regular folks. And notice that at this time, people had to go up to the altar rail, which was near the altar, or the communion rail, which was near the altar. Now we've got 2 pictures of Christmas time. And then 3 pictures of a youth Sunday. And then by a picture which I thought might be an introduction. Oops, another picture of a choir. I think I've got maybe yet another one. I do, of the choir scene. And then a picture that I thought was an introduction of new council members, but after counting the people, there are 8 women and 6 men up there, so I don't think it can be introduction of council members. And I don't know really what it is. Lastly, I thought you might like to see the congregation and the sanctuary from the pastor's view. Now, just a few pictures of the Caroline Furnace trips. Here's a picture of one of the Epiphany groups at a Caroline Furnace work weekend. Next, we have a couple of pictures in the dining hall. Followed by a picture of one of the sleeping cabins. And then 3 pictures of both adults and youth actually doing some work. And the last 2 pictures are group pictures of Epiphany folks on the work weekends. Now we get back to the 1990s at Epiphany and into the 2000s. After Brent Thomas's resignation, council decided to replace him with 2 persons. While Carolyn Huntley continued as leisure time director, retired pastor Carl Beyer became the pastoral assistant, and Ann Liu became coordinator of volunteers. Also in 1993, Lutheran Family Services rented 2 rooms in the caretaker's cottage for $100 a month. That summer, Camp Epiphany was held again with 34 children, 11 of whom were from Crestview. Activities included a boating trip on the James, a trip to Three Lakes Park, a presentation by Henrico firefighters, a trip to the Children's Museum, and a swim at the Jewish Community Center. That fall, the nursery school had 102 children, handled by a staff of 10. And at that time also, John Hartman, as scoutmaster, was able to increase the troop from 15 to 20 boys. In December, Epiphany engaged in its first Caritas effort, providing shelter for 36 persons in Price Hall, which was known as the Fellowship Hall at that time. One negative happening was that spotlight that we saw that illuminated the cross was twice stolen from our front yard before it was anchored securely enough. In January 1994, Millie DeLestinaire finished making 15 choir robes for the Cherub Choir, with R.C. Williamson having provided the material for them. The first Tuesday of each month was continued as the meeting date for the committees. Even though pledges went down by 4.5% compared to 1993, the income for the year was $413,986, while expenses were only $390,778. Leisure time continued to be the most popular activity, with its members coming from 6 different Lutheran churches, 6 Roman Catholic churches, 7 Presbyterian churches, 12 Methodist churches, 9 Baptist churches, 2 Brethren, 2 Disciples of Christ, and 5 Episcopal churches. 65 of the members were from Epiphany. And here is Mount Washington Hotel, where the Leisure Time group stayed on their trip to New Hampshire. And we've got 2 pictures of Luther's house on their trip to Germany. Front door and one inside picture. But back to more mundane topics. Epiphany's youth raised over $1,600 during the year by a yard sale, 2 car washes, 1 ice cream social, and a pancake supper. And the proceeds were used to buy ponchos for the 40 Caritas guests and to take 9 Crestview children Christmas shopping. Social ministry distributed Thanksgiving baskets to 8 families and helped 1 family get their gas turned back on for their cooking and heating. By 1995, Adolph Platz had begun what is now the Archives Committee, without which this program you are now watching would not have been possible. It was also the year that Epiphany's basketball team won the Men's Church League Championship, beating Trinity Lutheran in the final. The congregation also held an annual golf tournament in these years. April was the month when the federal building in Oklahoma City was destroyed by a truck bomb blast. At Epiphany, we were congratulating ourselves when we learned that Epiphany was the largest contributor in the Virginia Synod to the United Lutheran Appeal. And that summer, Camp Epiphany was held for the 6th straight year. In September, the Henrico County Sheriff's Department had rented the upper room for training purposes, and they continued to rent it for 14 months at $500 a month. The examiners began carrying a page devoted to a job information exchange. The winter of 96 contained the blizzard of 96, as it was known, which led to 32 members helping to clear the snow in time for Epiphany to hold its Sunday services. This was the year Epiphany obtained its first 9-month vicar, a gentleman by the name of Bill Ridenauer. Now, I thought this was a picture of Bill Ridenauer, but I've been put in my place. I found that this was not Bill Ridenauer, but was Danny Coughlin. Pastor Price was probably happy to have Bill around since he had been named chair of the Synod Committee on Candidacy. He also had 18 baptisms that year, 19 weddings, and 11 funerals. This was also the year when our present sign was put up in front of the church at the cost of $8,169. Now this is the old sign, and here's the new one that replaced it and is our present sign. After 22 years of use, the handbells were refurbished, and a gift allowed the purchase of some new bells, along with racks and covers for them. Also, a hymn, along with its music, which had been composed by Perry Nelson, was chosen best of 57 submissions to the Hymn Society. Pledging went well that year, with 297 pledges being returned, with a record $310,500 being pledged. In June, a special congregational meeting was called to consider refurbishing, refinishing, and upholstering the pews. And while not all things were approved, $19,000 was granted for the refurbishing. When work was started, however, it was found that they needed more work than originally assumed. Also, the church automobile was replaced for $16,400, while the second floor of the educational wing was leased to North Star Academy for educational purposes. Late that summer, Pastor Carl Beyer died, and by November, Pastor Ken Crumpton was named the pastoral assistant, and he immediately began holding weekly healing services and putting healing messages in the Examiner. In the spring of 1997, after completing 17 years as Epiphany's organist, Perry Nelson moved to St. Louis, Missouri, and for 3 months, Pastor Crumpton's wife, Kathy, served as our organist. On August 1st, Kevin Barger began as the new organist choir director, and we are fortunate a quarter century later to still have him. Kevin soon accomplished an increase in the participation in the choirs. The bell choir had more ringers than there were bells, but a fourth octave was purchased. The librarian, Chris Crouch, had 2 book fairs where she sold over $700 of books. In the spring of '97, Pastor Huntley died, but Carolyn continued the leisure time work without let up. The women now had 5 circles and a coordinating committee composed of Shirley Spangler, Jerry Smith, Alice Hack, Doris Richards, Jan Bush, Ann Richter, Anna Platts, and Pam Walters kept the 5 circles working in unison. Council set up a long-range planning committee which would soon suggest major changes. And that fall would be the 25th anniversary of the nursery school. January saw Millie DeLestonere making 5 more robes for the cherub choir. And the Refugee Resettlement Committee announced it had hoped to sponsor a family that spring. And by April, Jelena Damjanovic and her 2 sons were here from Serbia. And by the way, I have kept in touch with one of those sons. His name was Peja. He now goes by PJ. And he was up here a couple of weeks ago. And I met his wife and his 4 children. Also that spring, Donnie Nimmel became the new vicar. Betsy Williamson had an Easter egg hunt for the cherub choir. Beryl Wernham celebrated her 10th year as church secretary. Matt Greenshields headed up Camp Epiphany, and I doubt that that was Gilby's vodka that he really had in that box there. And Anna Platts was elected president of the Church Women United. And Beth Barger would begin her first year as coordinator of volunteers, a position she held until this last October. Also in October, the treasurer reported that the contributions were $9,000 ahead of 1997. And in November, the congregation voted for a call committee to be formed to look for an associate pastor. On the other side of events, the Gokenauers, the 2 folks in the middle there, Lee and Louise Gokenauer, announced that they were moving to Woodstock, and the Lutheran Family Services would no longer rent space in the caretaker's cottage, nor would North Star Academy rent the 2nd floor of the education wing, which meant a loss of $15,000 to Epiphany. Also, Christian education faced several resignations as the chair, the 2nd through 5th grade supervisor, the 6th through the 12th grade supervisor, and the adult supervisor all resigned. And I was pretty interested in education at that time, but I cannot remember for the life of me why these resignations occurred. I remember nothing about it. In January of 1999, Pastor Price toured the Holy Land. He had been 2nd runner-up in the voting for the new synodical bishop, with Jim Mauney having been selected. The most notable event at Epiphany, though, was the adoption of the 500 by 50 goal, which included a new construction effort as well as the goal of averaging 500 people at the weekly services by our 50th anniversary in 2002. Let me show you a couple more pictures of the Prices in the Holy Land. Here's Chris preaching, of course, and one final picture. Now, going back to 500 by 50, it was quite a challenge to try to reach 500 by 2002 because attendance in 1999 was only 373. It was also the year, though, that Pastor Mark England became our new associate pastor. People agreed we needed to do a better job of welcoming new members, and the new member sponsor program, which had been dropped, was reinstituted, and the number of name tag Sundays was also increased. Also, the church got its first homepage on the World Wide Web thanks to Pastor Mark England. Epiphany's aid to those in need continued apace, and it was made known that the year before, the food brought in by the Sunday school classes alone had fed 250 persons in 75 households. Caritas, after a year's hiatus, returned with 40 homeless sheltered for a week. Camp Epiphany was held again, while the traditional vacation Bible school had 65 children attend. Caroline Furnace was offered a matching grant if they could raise $60,000. And Epiphany responded by raising $2,000 plus a matching $1,000 from Lutheran Brotherhood toward that goal. So we contributed $3,000 of Caroline Furnace's $60,000. In December, Frank and Joan Bark not only gave 2 Christmas baskets, but they also found a bunk bed for a Crestview family who had 2 boys who had been sleeping on the floor because they had no bed. In June, Leisure Time broke its 14-year record when 160 people attended one of its programs. In December, it presented a program entitled Christmas Through the Eyes of Crestview Children. The Leisure Time group trips that year included one to England and Wales in May and a cruise on the Upper Mississippi in August. Pam Walters became notable in 1999 when she was elected chair of the Synod Council Nominating Committee, the first lay person to hold that office. Chris Price, who had been on a committee to test the possibility of establishing a home for the elderly in the Richmond area, announced that they had located 100-acre site in Goochland. But I don't think they ever did anything with that site. We heard no more about it. But for many members, the major activity of '99 revolved around the 500 by 50 campaign, which meant stairs for the balcony, chancel renovation, a new chapel, parking improvements, and paying down the debt. In 2000, 500 by 50 received $1.2 million in pledges, which allowed $325,000 to be paid down on the mortgage, and plans were completed for stairs to the balcony and for the new chapel. The endowment fund reached $105,470.60, and the church sponsored Majid Mahabad and his wife and son, with 19 people welcoming them to the airport in late summer. I had, unfortunately, no pictures of the Mahabad family. 2 sessions of Caritas were held, one in the summer and another in December. And the ladies group sent 36 quilts to help out the 1,500 families in North Carolina whose homes had been devastated by Hurricane Floyd. In July, the Richmond congregations that had wanted a retirement home had purchased the former Richmond Area Hospital's 14.5-acre campus, but I don't think anything was ever done with that either. On the other side of the coin, Camp Epiphany was not held due to the gentrification of the Crestview area, though that gentrification didn't mean that all the poor people left all at once there. And while one of the main aims of 500 by 50 was to average 500 people in services by 2002, in 2000 the average was only 380, only a 7-person gain from the year before. Nancy Greenshields, who had been doing altar care for 5 years, resigned, but Kathy DeLestinaire took her place. In December, Pastor Fisher's wife, Bobby, had been injured in an auto accident and was paralyzed from the waist down. Richmond that summer faced an unusually difficult drought. In place of Camp Epiphany, the church worked with Lutheran Family Services to give 5 foster children a week at Caroline Furnace. The development of a 50th anniversary pictorial directory also got underway. And in November, a benefit was held for Bobby Fisher. The youth that fall held a very successful Back to the 50s fundraiser. A 20s and 30s group was organized, and at Christmas time, they went on a Tacky Lights tour. The most sobering event was the death of Pastor Sala. And of course, this is a picture of the memorial in the Sala Chapel upon his death. And that ends it for today.